Hello, my name is Michael and welcome to my channel, Troubles with Tess. In the next few videos that I'm going to make, I want to talk about my own personal experience with COVID, living here in Cape Town, in the Western Cape of South Africa. It really is a personal take. It's what happened to me did not happen to everybody else. You know, when COVID first started, I watched very closely what was going on in China. So that was January of 2020. The reason being that I had a friend who is a commercial pilot. He flies, at that stage, he was flying a Boeing 787, and he was working for China South. So the city that they were based in was very close to Wuhan, about 700 kilometers away. And what happened in his life at the end of January of 2020, all of the expat pilots that were flying for this airline, and it's the biggest in China, they divide it into, because China is so big, north, south, east, and west, and the south part of the airline is the biggest. They put all of the expat pilots into a 787 and flew the whole lot back to Heathrow Airport. And thank you very much, that's the end of your contracts until this whole situation of COVID is resolved. And if you were like myself and you're watching what was going on in China, pretty harsh measures were put in place for the Chinese people that were affected by COVID. You know, I can just remember seeing drones flying around and loudspeakers shouting at the people to get back inside their apartment buildings and whatever, if they're just caught walking on the road outside. And then, of course, during February, COVID spread, first of all into Italy and into Spain. So you sit there watching the hospitals overflowing in those two countries and chaos. And then, of course, you also start hearing about these so-called experts that are going to help the world handle this COVID situation. So that involved the World Health Organization, and a name that I won't ever forget, Dr. Anthony Fauci from the United States. And you could see, obviously, is that we were going into a lockdown at some stage. Everybody was going to go into a lockdown. And obviously, there were people pro-lockdown situations and people very anti-lockdown. Now, myself, I was semi-retired and in the hospitality industry in South Africa. It's in Cape Town is one of your biggest industries because Cape Town is such a popular tourist destination. And for me personally, with my house situated where it was about 250 meters from the main kite surfing beach in Joburg. So anybody staying at my house could literally just walk to the beach, borrow somebody else's pump, and off you go, leaving nothing on the beach. I was scared about my own business because you get into a lockdown. That means that your business is closed, doesn't it? And there's no money coming in. What I went and did, I had commercial insurance. I've been very careful with this because when you're involved in kite surfing or windsurfing, they're quite dangerous sports, specifically kite surfing. And I didn't want anything to happen to any of my guests. And I wasn't covered by insurance for, you know, whatever crazy thing goes wrong. So I'd insured a long time prior, probably it was from, say, early 2014 as I started this business. I made sure, it might have even been early 2013, I can't remember. I made sure I had commercial cover. And I looked at my policy, and in black and white, it stated there that in the event of a notifiable disease, and COVID-19 was absolutely a notifiable disease, the insurance company would cover me for a period up to 6 months for amount of money of 420,000 rand. Now, I just want to explain quickly that when we're talking rands and dollars, the official exchange rate right now, in the middle of, well, towards the end of 2023, is 20 rand for $1. Our exchange rate has gone through the roof in South Africa. To a large extent, it's caused by who our government's friends are. We are a BRICS country, and BRICS, BRICS, stands for Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. Next year, 2024, I know Iran is going to be another member country of BRICS, or whatever they're going to call it then. Our government hasn't got the best friends in the current situation. You know, they can't go and tell Putin that he's completely wrong invading Ukraine because they're big friends with Putin. And if Putin is friends with North Korea, by implication, it means that our government is friends with North Korea. Iran being friends with Russia and joining BRICS means that our country is friends with Iran. And so it goes on with the politics of our country. There's a reason that they do support Russia and China. It goes back historically when the indigenous peoples through the 1960s, 70s, and 80s were getting rid of the colonial powers that had been in place in Africa to get self-determination, in other words, to rule the country themselves. The battles that happened in all of the countries, the wars that were fought, were largely internal, that the one side of the population was backed by the West and the other side of the population was backed by Russia and or China. So it was an East-West fight, part of the Cold War, actually. But for instance, the ANC was supported by Russia. So Russia was their friend. Russia helped them fight for their freedom. And a lot of physical backup was given by Cuba. So Cuban people, soldiers, actually came into Angola to fight for the communist-backed side against the South African army that was backing the Western-backed side of this internal war that was on the go. And a lot of South Africans actually went to Cuba in exile, black South Africans I'm talking about, that were the leaders of the uprising, that if they had been caught by the apartheid government, they would have been thrown in jail. So they were sitting actually as heroes in Cuba, being treated very nicely. And we all know that when you go to an island in paradise and you're living there as a tourist, your life there is very different compared to how the locals are actually living on that very same island on a permanent basis. You're living well, you're smoking their cigars, you're drinking their rum, you're listening to all the music in Cuba, you're having a good time. And today, there are many people in our government that still see Cuba as a way of governing a country to aspire to, with that absolute central control, etc. And everybody in the whole world, excepting for the people that lead Cuba, and some people in our government know that Cuba is an absolute disaster. I'm giving you this background because our government is big friends with China, and they'd watched, obviously, what China had done with COVID and the lockdowns that had been implemented. And when basically all of my guests, they were Germans, they had their flights altered during the first week of March, at the latest, maybe two weeks into March. But they were worried Germany was going to close its borders. And the airlines that they had flown with had been rescheduling everybody's flights home. It was to get everybody back to Europe before the countries shut down. So it was pretty much chaos. And we sat down with all sorts of rumors flying about what our government was going to do to us, how they were going to treat us with this COVID story. And it was during about the last week of March of 2020, on a Sunday night at 8 o'clock in the evening, as Cyril Ramaphosa gave a speech to the nation on television, which I'm sure almost everybody in South Africa watched. It was pretty important to find out what was going to happen to us. And what he did is he told us about all the things the government was going to do for us, like build these temporary hospital systems in places like the International Conference Centre in Cape Town, which had plenty of space. You had to put the beds in, and obviously breathing equipment, because that's your big story with COVID, is you don't get the oxygen. And then they also spoke about the grants that they were going to give to everybody that had been working and would not be working because of the lockdown, which was basically most of the people in the country. And this grant was for an amount of 3,500 Rand a month that the company or the business that you worked for had to apply for all of their staff, giving proof of the fact that you'd been employed, and the government would then pay the business that you worked for all of the money for all of the employees, which the company would then distribute to the employees. 3,500 Rand at 20 Rand to a dollar equates to 175, say, dollars a month. It doesn't sound like very much money at all. But our exchange rate, if you did the Big Mac test, which is another way to look at what an exchange rate should be between countries, is just using the price of a Big McDonald's burger in the United States against the country that you want to compare. And let's say in the States, a Big Mac is around $5. I think I'm right with this. In this country, it's about 50 Rand. So it's suggesting an exchange rate that should be about 10 Rand to $1. Like I've explained earlier, we're being punished internationally because of who our government has chosen as their friends. But even so, that money was really paid out just to enable the vast majority of our population to be able to buy food, because that's really all that the government left open for business under lockdown. Was any shop or supermarket or whatever that sold food could trade. It was a necessity. The only other thing that you could buy was medicine. But every other business was shut down. Everything. You couldn't buy anything else. And you basically had to sit at home and do nothing. You weren't allowed out. You weren't allowed to go for a walk. You weren't allowed to walk your dog. You weren't allowed to go to a public park. You couldn't take your bicycle for a ride. You couldn't go for a run. You weren't allowed to go to the beach. Beaches were banned. So absolutely everything was shut down for us. Absolutely. In fact, if you are caught in your car just going for a drive and you weren't going to the shop to buy food, the threat was that you would be arrested and thrown in jail. I'm going to cut it at this point and then film part two of this because the story is quite long.